Hello there.
It's Thursday at noon.
I know it is.
Do you remember our arrangement?
Thursdays at noon on CFUV.
Are you ready to get started?
What do you have in mind?
What I want to do now is called first person plural.
You make it sound excessively attractive.
That's what I have in mind.
Scientific education may seem out of the purview of sociological study. After all, isn't sociology about human studies, and isn't astronomy and physics about the so-called hard sciences? The questioning of Western values and male-dominated systems by different ethnic groups, postcolonial scholars, and feminists has led to a questioning how science is honored and taught in our society. Thus, scientific education has become more sensitive to these criticisms and has made attempts to appeal to a wider audience, especially to children. While scholars debate the best ways to present science to children of color and to girls, many scientific research centers, parks, and museums have begun to emphasize fun activities that can entertain all ages while opening up the world of scientific discovery. A wonderful example of science being presented in more exciting ways can be found just up the road from Victoria in Sandwich at the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory, where research is conducted at the Plaskett Telescope and fun is had at the center of the universe. The center provides the usual observatory attractions such as stargazing, exhibits about the sun, moon, earth, planets, stars, galaxies, and the universe, and presentations designed to teach constellations and fun astronomical facts. However, the activities at the center go beyond the exhibits and presentations and include games and singing, including earlier this summer, a musical about the history of Canadian astronomy. Don Enright, program coordinator for the Center of the Universe, seems on the surface an unlikely candidate for teaching science. He is a composer, songwriter, and performer, and his training is in music education, not science. But on any given summer weekend, you can find Don entertaining and educating children of all ages about astronomy, the planets, and most especially, the moon. He took time from his busy schedule last Sunday evening to talk with us about science education and how a singer-songwriter ended up howling at the moon. Let's begin with a little bit about your background. Tell me about your education and what you did before coming to the center of the universe.
Oh, my education is in education. I was actually majoring in arts education. My background is in music and teaching music, which is funny that I should end up in an astronomy center. But I was working my way through school long ago. I got a job working as a park naturalist because I've always been a naturalist. I've always been very much interested in sciences in the natural world. And I started working in the parks of Alberta as a park naturalist and made my way through school and decided I didn't want to be a music teacher just yet. And so I decided to pursue my other interest, which was sharing nature with people. And I worked in the parks part-time and traveled, and then I worked in the parks full-time as a program coordinator, as an education program coordinator. And that's what I've remained doing. I've kept at it, doing writing educational programs and coordinating educational programs in museums and science centers. Started off in Calgary, and then I spent the last few years in Ottawa at a new visitor center there.
So do you have science education as well, or is this something that you just sort of learned on the job as you went along?
I have very little formal science education. It was a minor in university. But my astronomy and the nature education that I know, that's all amateur. That's all stuff I picked up on my own. Sometimes we like to hire people who have a formal education, and yet sometimes those people are not the best communicators. And sometimes people have a great passion for it, are the better communicators. We find it's easier to take the great communicators and teach them the content, rather than to take the experts and make them great communicators. It takes time, though. It takes a lot of it. It's a fair investment, but they turn out to be much more able to speak with the public. And of course, the best of all worlds is to find an expert who's a great communicator, and we have one or two of those too. They're rare.
Okay. Do any of them sing?
No, that's the whole problem. They don't sing.
I've heard that many scientists, especially mathematicians, are also good at music.
Yeah, you see, you hear a lot of that. When I was in university, I used to play in an orchestra with some of the pure science majors, and they were very good. The music is interesting in that it appeals to many different parts of the brain. It uses many different parts of the brain at once, so it unites the completely expressive side with a very analytical side that has to know how to count and has to know how to think in terms of form and structure and have a certain mathematical discipline to it, if nothing else. They do seem to lend themselves to each other.
Tell me a little bit about how it's organized here. You mentioned that there were a couple of people who were both scientists and communicators, but it seems like you have like a group of people, some of which serve the function of sort of allowing the public to kind of peek in and see what's going on in astronomy, and then you have researchers here. So how is the whole facility organized? Can you give me an idea?
Sure, yeah. The facility up here on the hill is mainly a research facility. It's Canada's, the federal government's main center of astronomy for the entire nation. And so this goes way back to 1918 when they built the telescope here. This became a center of astronomy. And as Canada's interests have expanded to Penticton, Hawaii, and Chile, etc., this is still both the administrative center and the main research center where the bulk of the researchers are employed. And they're part of the National Research Council of Canada, and the Research Council's mandate is to foster innovation and discovery for Canadians. So it's primarily research. But in the last several years especially, there's been a real shift towards public outreach where the organization realizes that if we want brilliant minds in the future, you have to start fostering them today. And there's been quite an exciting shift towards reaching out, especially to young people, but also to the general public, to try to demonstrate to people that, what we do is important. The idea of astronomy is important. It's something that Canada does well. It's something that Canada aspires to do better in the future. And we need to get young people involved.
I would assume that you have some connections like to the public school system and so forth, but also do the researchers here have like academic connections? And I know that the amateur astronomers come out here for the star parties, so give me a little sense of like the broader community connections that you have.
Well, in terms of the astronomers, the full-time researchers here, certainly many of them are teachers as well, and many of them do have teaching roles at the University of Victoria, at least on a part-time basis, and many of the University of Victoria's professors observe here and do their research in conjunction with the researchers here. So there's a real link between the observatory and the University of Victoria, which has a very, very strong astronomy department. We have more astronomers per capita in Victoria than any other Canadian city, professional astronomers.
Any speculation as to why?
It's because of the observatory and the University of Victoria, basically. It's the two really strong nodes, the federal government's research here and the university, definitely. The NRC has a number of informal partnerships, certainly, where, again, the astronomers will teach. They work in partnership. Some of them will be on similar research teams and research projects with the astronomers from the university there as well.
But the facility is not formally connected with the university in the sense of being an extension of their educational program or anything like that?
I don't know how formally that infrastructure is set up, to tell you the truth. Certainly, students from UVic, from UBC, and we even occasionally from other universities end up observing here with some of the full-time observers here, certainly. But I don't know how formal that relationship is. My role is mainly in the public outreach here at the Visitor Center. So I haven't had personally a real extensive relationship with the university, except I have presented to the Department of Education there and to tell them about what our education philosophy is here and how we might appeal to those future teachers there and that sort of thing. That's a relationship I'd like to foster more in the future. You mentioned the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada. They're a really, really active chapter here in Victoria, and they're a group of purely amateur astronomers, very knowledgeable, very dedicated, and they are our partners in public education here at the Visitor Center. We couldn't do a lot of our programs without them. They come up here with their own gear on their own time, and they set up their telescopes, and they spend hours and hours each Saturday sharing the stars with the public. And so it's, I think, a really rewarding relationship, certainly for us, and they tell me it's rewarding for them too.
After this facility, where would you say is the best place around the city to do some observing?
In the city of Victoria, I like to think we're the best site. Many of the amateurs head west to Souk, where it's dark, 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 and I'm not exactly sure where they go. And also they head up, for star parties often they'll head up the Malahat, up Duncan Way as well. There will be events up there. Victoria's fairly wiped out. I sometimes go when there's something I want to see. I live close to downtown. I will head down to Dallas Road, but that you'll only get access to the southern part of the sky. The north is wiped out from Dallas Road completely.
Vancouver Island is pretty dark, though, compared to the rest of North America, isn't it? Mm-hmm. In terms of once you get out of the greater Victoria area.
Yeah, it certainly is. When you see satellite maps of the light pollution of the world, really northern Canada, the remote parts of Canada like the island and the other islands, Siberia, southern Africa, like there's very few places where it's dark on this planet.
Of course, Siberia and the northern part of the country all have snow to contend with.
Yeah.
Vancouver Island has a little bit milder
Oh yeah, we
weather.
can still get some beautiful dark skies here.
Yeah.
What's your favorite sci-fi movie?
I don't like much science fiction. I'm ashamed to say it. I don't watch a lot of it. My favorite sci-fi. As a kid, I was absolutely smitten by Star Wars, but I didn't follow through. I wouldn't go see the new ones. I see the reviews, and they just don't interest me. As a kid, I was mad for Star Trek, but I don't like the second generation. What intrigues me in stories are people, and I don't need them to have wrinkles in their forehead to be interesting people. The science in most science fiction is so lame that you end up, if it's a good movie, it's good because of the human interest in the stories. And I go see other movies for that. There's so few movies that you see interesting science happening. There's I don't know. It doesn't appeal to me very much. I'm not a very good science fiction watcher.
What would you say is your least favorite line from a sci-fi movie, vis-a-vis the ineptitude of the science?
My pet peeve of all, it happens in every science fiction movie, the spaceship flies over or the asteroid goes over and it roars and something blows up and it makes a terrible noise. And it's a terrible thing to do because we try so hard with our school groups to talk about the fabric of space and the nature of sound and the nature of electromagnetic energy, and to say that there's no sound in space, sound needs a medium. Kids don't understand that sound is a physical vibration and it's not like light and radio and gamma and all the other. And one of the reasons they don't understand that is that they'll hear things go kablooey in space. It drives me insane. I hate it.
You talk about the kids seeing this and everything. Why does science need to be presented in the way that it is presented in order to engender interest? I mean, a lot of times science is talked about as if it's not part of a culture, as if it's something far away from or above it, because it concerns itself with evidence and concerns itself with speaking in the language of numbers and so forth, right? And so it gets presented sometimes as if it isn't part of society, but something sort of universal and outside of society. And yet here you are singing songs and creating an entertainment atmosphere. How do you reconcile that? Why is science needing PR, so to speak?
Why does it need such PR?
Yeah.
Let's see. I think that for children in our society, some kids do take to science automatically. I think there's a percentage of children that take to science, whether it's they grow up in certain families or because they're boys and it's much more acceptable for boys to take to science. A small percentage of kids just are fascinated by numbers. They're fascinated by experimenting, and some kids figure out how to do empirical experiments very young. They figure it out and they love to do it. Other kids just aren't interested because they don't feel it touches their lives. There's so much there's so much of a barrage of excitement in a kid's life. There's so many things that they are forced to see and hear all day long, and they tend to gloss over a lot, I think, when you get into telling kids about experimenting the scientific method, thinking scientifically, etc. A lot of kids feel from a very early age that it's not for them. They'd rather listen to rock music videos. They would rather watch the cartoons. They'd rather shop. There's so many things that kids would rather do. And I think our society is guilty of channeling girls in particular away from science and into doing nice, taking part in nice frilly distractions or doing the pure arts or pure literature, or telling them that no, girls are good at languages and girls are good at the fine arts. It has changed certainly since I was a kid, but still, girls are in particular, and young kids in general, are channeled away from thinking scientifically. They think it's dull. They think that it's really, really dull.
Do you do some special activities up here to attract girls?
We haven't.
Out of context, that was a really bad question.
Not exactly. I would say that some of our strengths are that we do appeal to girls. For example, we do a program that really appeals to guide groups, and guides are really, really fun to work with because guides are already a chance for girls to get together and try things that they might not try elsewhere. And our sleepover programs, we run them for guides and scouts and children of all kinds, but they're a huge hit with guides because they get here in an isolated environment doing fun things about science. And one of our interpreters here is really quite gifted at working with girls because she's a young astronomer, and the girls see her as a role model, and it really, really, I think, strikes a chord with them. I think a lot of the stuff that I try to do in integrating the arts and science also appeals to the kids who are not scientists, and that's one of the reasons we do it. One of the cores of our philosophy here is that if you're already an astronomer when you come up here, you are our secondary audience, not our primary audience. You're our secondary audience. Our primary audience are people who don't know anything about astronomy and don't care. Those are the people we're trying to reach. That's why we use workshops, demonstrations, songs, skits, activities, stuff that they're not expecting, stuff that will strike them and go, wait, this is way more fun than I was planning on having today.
Besides getting more people interested in science in terms of careers and so forth, what other kind of goals do you have? I mean, I sense that there's also a broader objective here. Why get the community interested in it? Why care whether people like science or not, if they're not going to make it a career?
They're not going to make it a career. I think it's, once again, it goes back to who we are. We're the National Research Council. Part of our mandate is just showing people that innovation is important. So that if you come up here as, I don't care, a mechanic or a kindergarten teacher, whatever your walk of life, if you walk out of here going, wow, what Canada's doing in astronomy is fascinating. Astronomy is fascinating and it's fun, and I'm going to look at the stars differently next time. Well, that sort of, I think it engenders a whole new attitude towards the sciences, towards innovation, towards discovery, and towards astronomy. Not only can we, I think, foster in our public a positive attitude towards research, but we can also really help people enjoy their lives and feel proud of Canada, feel proud of themselves because they know their stars a little bit better, and I think create an environment in which astronomy is relevant to them.
What kind of music production do you do here?
Well, it's pretty simple. I write songs, and one of my colleagues writes songs as well. Actually, two of my colleagues write songs, and I do the composing, and we do it very simply electronically on a computer, and we do basic electronic studio production. It's so easy nowadays, even compared to 12 years ago. It's so easy, and so I compose the music and record it digitally, just put it to CD and insert it into our PowerPoints. We do PowerPoint as an art form up here. We take PowerPoint to its absolute limit and turn it into shows.
What else do you do with your music when you are outside the observatory?
I have my own musical projects, yeah. My own interest is musical theater, and I poke away at a few different musical theater projects of my own.
Do you perform here locally?
I don't. I'd like to, actually. I've only been here a year, and I don't perform.
Were you primarily responsible for the musical earlier this summer?
Oh yeah, that was mine. It wasn't a large-scale musical. Did you see that production?
I didn't.
I
saw something about it on the website.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd follow it up.
I'll reprise it. It's a half-hour program, and the premise of the program is that I'm I'm an astronomer educator up here, but I always wanted to be a great writer of musical theater. So I get a call from a mysterious voice, and he says, I want to hear your stuff, and send it to me. And so I madly, with the audience, I go about, I present all these tunes, and my inspiration is the history of Canadian astronomy, which has the potential to be pretty lean, pretty dull. But so I do a bunch of songs about the history of astronomy in Canada. It's quite a lot of fun. The audience, the response was really gratifying. They sang along. I project the lyrics. It's like karaoke. I project the lyrics on the screen, and people sang like crazy. It was really rewarding. Not only did they sing, but after the program, they asked really intelligent questions. You know, they weren't just singing, they were listening, they were watching. They were gratifying. It was gratifying, yeah.
Well, we appreciate your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It was fun.
Altitude, velocity, light. 8.5 down, 220 feet. 15 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down, 5.5 down. Within 6 feet, 6.5 down, 5.5 down. 9 forward. Good. Within 20 feet. 100 feet, 3.5 down, 9 forward. 5%. 185. 875 feet. That's looking good, down a half. 6 forward. 60 seconds. Lights on. 6. Down 2.5. Forward. Forward. That's 40 feet, down 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. 4 forward. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. 6, down a half. 30 seconds. Forward, drift. Right. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
Among the programs that are offered on Saturday and Sunday nights throughout the summer is Don's Howl at the Moon presentation. He encourages the audience to participate through pretending to be professors, spouting out various theories on the origins of the moon, providing a 3D view of the moon's surface, complete with those funny glasses, and showing pictures of the phases of the moon, sometimes getting the audience to shine lights on each other in an effort to see how the moon reflects sunlight. He varies the program depending upon how many people are in attendance on a given night, but each session ends with Don's own composition, Howl at the Moon, complete with karaoke-style lyric sheets flashing on the PowerPoint screen. Come on now, sing along at the chorus.
Well, we can't finish a program without singing about it. Are you going to help me out? 4 billion years ago, they say, a great big object came our way, knocked a chunk of planet Earth, and that chunk was the moon at birth. It's big and bright in evening skies, a quarter of the Earth's full size. Our closest neighbor, you might say, 3,000 K away. Now this is the part you can help me say. So like this. Hey, look up, I never thought our closest neighbor to the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune, howl at the moon. Howl at the moon again. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune, howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. It'll come back later, you get way more chances. Once the moon was put in place, forces shaped its lunar phase. Meteors dropped in from space. Craters are their lasting trace. Molten rock from deep inside made the lava seas we spied. It's missing just one thing, I fear. There's not much of an atmosphere. Alright, now you get a chance to sing. Here we go. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Again. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Now this is my part. When it's between Earth and the Sun, it's up in daylight and no one can see it shining through the blue. Then we say that moon is new, but lit by sunlight from the side, a quarter moon will meet your eye. Lit full on from rear sunlight, and that whole moon looks full and bright. Here we go now. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Again. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Excellent. That's my part again. All the ocean tides we see are caused by lunar gravity. The sun helps to make those seas rise and fall with steady ease. Across the moon, Earth's shadow slips. We call that a lunar eclipse. Sometimes the moon blocks out the sun. A solar eclipse is rare but fun. Here we go. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. One last time. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Big finish. Howl at the moon. Thanks for being part of my moon program, everybody. I appreciate you singing along. It makes it kind of fun.
Throughout the summer months and on into October, the Center of the Universe will be offering programs to the public. Saturdays you can come to the regular star parties. Sundays are special stargazer programs. If you want to howl at the moon with Dawn, you might want to make it a point to head up to the observatory this coming Sunday evening, July 21st, because the whole evening will be devoted to the moon. Other Stargazer Sunday topics yet to come this summer are Salute to the Solar System, Catch a Falling Star, Black Hole Blackout, The Search for E.T., Big Bang Bash. You'll get a chance to see the big Plaskett Telescope, which has been on the hill in Sandra since 1918. On clear evenings, members of the Royal Astronomical Society bring their telescopes out and give you a chance to see the stars up close and personal. For more information about the Dominion Astrophysicial Observatory, the Plaskett Telescope, and the Center of the Universe, you can call them at 250-363-8262 or visit their website at www.hia.nrc.ca/cu/. For more information about the Royal Astronomical Society, you can call them at 416-924-7973, email them at members@rasc.ca, or visit their website at www.rasc.ca. Our thanks to Don Enright and the wonderful people at the Center of the Universe for showing us a good time.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
You're listening to First Person Plural on CFUV, Victoria's Public Radio, 101.9 FM, 104.3 cable, and on the internet, cfuv.uvig.ca. giving sociology an edge!
Well, I had a really good time at the observatory. I enjoyed seeing the presentation.
So did I. I really love going up there. If anybody has not been to the center of the universe, it's just a super time. We've been up there, 3 or 4 times now?
Yeah, and I've always enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Been up during the day, been up for star parties. Well worth the trip.
For those of you who are curious about it, I was also singing on Howl at the Moon. I was singing on the chorus along with most of the other people in the audience as part of the pre-planned audience participation.
So was I, but we could only hear you with him. So it was a smaller crowd than usual that night. Last year when we went, there was about...
It was packed. I'd say there were 40 or 50 people, and this time around there were barely a dozen.
If that. I think it's important because, at least I am, I don't know what you're about to say, but I'm about to talk about science education in a critical tone, and I think I want to make it clear pretty quickly here before I get into my criticisms that I love science, and I think the scientific method is a great way to learn about the world, and I'm very supportive of outreach efforts like what's going on at the center of the universe. I especially love astronomy and have enjoyed being a very minor amateur astronomer. The criticisms I'm about ready to make are not meant in any way to reflect upon what's going on at the center of the universe, but I think that a sociological critique of science education is telling and worthwhile, and so I want to offer that.
It begins with the observation that science is taught, that we don't all have a cyclotron in our basement, and as such, to a great extent, we rely on the reports of others in matters scientific. Once you've noted that, then inevitably textual analysis becomes pertinent.
Sure, because teaching is done in language, therefore it is cultural. Because anytime we speak in English, we bring with our speaking the...
Cultural baggage.
Yeah, cultural baggage is a good word. Cultural baggage of English with it. And that includes the history, and that includes the current cultural productions that are going on, and that includes all the limitations and all of the richness of our culture. And of course, we're in Canada, so there's even specific Canadian culture that's brought in the way that English is spoken here.
Or French.
Or French. But I'm using English as an example.
Well, yeah, it is British Columbia after all. I wanted to talk a little bit about something that happened when we went to see a debate about this self-same subject. It was at a university that will remain nameless.
Yeah, we're going to protect the
guilty.
Protect the guilty here by not naming names, but we did attend a debate in Canada on the subject of science education. And it was a debate between 2 scientists who were discussing whether or not science could be considered in multicultural terms, and specifically whether or not science education should be sensitive to different cultures in presenting science. One side we thought was very articulate and intelligent and thought-provoking about the ways in which the presentation of science can be so grounded in Western civilization that has a tendency to exclude a certain portion of the world because of the worldview that's inherent in it. The other side of the debate was by a guy who just seemed to be whining, "Don't do this, you'll ruin science. This is not fair." it was kind of pathetic in a sense to see how the two sides were sort of not even discussing this topic together. One side came with evidence and articulated a particular point of view in a very intelligent way. The other side came with sort of an evangelistic fervor that just kept repeating over and over again, science is good, science is right, you can't say anything bad about science.
And by the end of the debate, the first guy was less concerned with holding up his end of the argument than he was with checking the exits to make sure he could make a quick getaway.
Yeah, even
if the other guy just completely freaked out, it got kind of silly toward the end. Even the moderator was criticizing the second guy by the end of it.
The thing I remember most about it, however, was that I thought that the arguments that the more articulate man that we dubbed Old Guy Number 1, his outline was an excellent outline in looking at science in cultural terms. I thought ultimately he was making a case to promote science in a way that would actually broaden scientific study and bring more people into actually doing scientific study. There was a certain acknowledgement in his approach to some of the ways in which science has been used in the causes of oppression. He took a look at how Aboriginals in Canada might view science differently than those of European descent. And I thought he did it in a very sensitive way, in a way that, I mean, his heart was with science. His heart was not to tear down science, but rather to promote it in a way that made sense.
No, he wasn't a technophobe at all.
No, not at all.
That wasn't his motivation.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid of how good science was, and he didn't disrespect it as a methodology.
Essentially, he was error checking. He wasn't going over it with the subtext that we should throw science out immediately, throw out the baby, the bathwater, and anybody in the vicinity. He was going over it with the attitude of a man who thinks that something needs to be fixed and we best get to work on it now.
Yeah, and he also was going at it with a sensitivity to the distinction between the methodology and the fact that the methodology is taught, and that the methodology can be used for whatever ends somebody wants to use it for. In other words, the scientific method is a, for lack of a better word, an honorable way to gain knowledge.
But I think what broke up the debate, what put them at odds irrevocably, is that the first guy marked the scientific method and didn't think of it as universal and didn't put forth that it was universal, but made some suggestions about an overhaul. And the second guy went nuts. You're just going to ruin everything for everybody seemed to be his
Yeah, it was reminiscent of a preacher screaming blasphemer rather than actually discussing God.
We were passing notes to each other during this whole thing. We were also trying very hard not to laugh.
Well, we didn't succeed in
And
not
failing.
laughing.
Patty was writing out something on her notebook called Deconstructing on the Fly, noting all the attributes that Old Guy Number 2 assigned to science, including personification.
Oh yeah, science
It could
was
think,
like
it could speak.
It had feelings that were going to be hurt. Science was a full-blown person in his rhetoric.
It was as if you were afraid that if we looked at it too closely, the whole thing would just fall apart. And if we didn't examine it, then it would still work. It was almost backwards in terms of hypothesis and review.
Yeah, in other words, he sort of forgot the scientific method in looking at science.
It was don't name hypotheses as such and don't review, because that's the sort of thing that can get out of hand very easily.
It reminded me of a book I had read, actually read around that time, by a woman named Sandra Harding. She's a feminist who took a look at science from a multicultural point of view, and a feminist and post-colonial critique. The name of the book is Science Multicultural? She suggests in the book that there is, well, she talks about what's called the unity of science thesis, which was proposed in the early 20th century. And this thesis suggests that there is only one world, that one and only one true account exists of that world, and that one unique method, science, will be the only method that can reflect the true account. Now those three, not really hypotheses, those three axioms are the things that are usually talked about when someone discusses the unity of science thesis. But she adds a fourth to it that I think is very interesting, especially as a sociologist. Not only does this one world, one account, and one methodology exist, but there is also, by implication, only one class of people who can do this truth, who can find this truth, and that class of people is scientists. And that brings with it all sorts of
contextual baggage.
Yes. For one thing, and Don alluded to this in his interview, science has not included, scientists as a class has not included many women over the years. There are lots of reasons for this, among which are things like women have been treated poorly in society. They have not been given the chances at education in the past that men have been given. Another part of this is that women are often taught very young, girls are taught that science is sort of masculine and not a good thing for girls to do. And even with all of this changing, and it has been changing, there's been a lot of effort in the United States and Canada to recruit girls to get them interested in science. Even with all of this changing, though, girls still tend to have, well, women tend to have career choices that makes it difficult for them to do science and have families. It's easier for men to choose a family and a career in science, where scientists often have to do a lot of their training and spend a lot of years in training when they're young, in their 20s and 30s. And by the time they're just getting their career going, would be about the time that a woman would no longer be able to bear children. This is very difficult for women to reconcile. It's much easier for men to reconcile the career path that most scientists take with a family life. So that makes it a hard choice for women, even women who are interested in science. There's also a lot of prejudice, and there was a report that just came out a couple of weeks ago, I believe, in the Chronicle of Higher Education that shows that women are still not getting tenured. So even women who get PhDs and go to universities and do all the things that they're supposed to do are still being passed over by tenure. And tenure is, for many academics who do science, the only way that you're going to get to do research. The only way that you're going to be recognized in your field is to get to a point where you are not teaching anymore. And if women are being passed over for tenure, in spite of the fact that they represent a majority now in the university in terms of professorships, I don't think that's true in the sciences, but overall, in general, there are more women professors than there are men professors now.
Well, by your argument, it would have to be professors in general.
Yes. I'm saying that it's still a bigger percentage of women have gone into science in the last few years than, say, 20 years ago. But even when they've gone into it, their career paths stall. They don't get to the meaty stuff, the stuff that gives them recognition, the stuff that allows them to do more discovery, more work, until later in life, because they get bogged down with family and they get passed over in tenure.
Does Harding see any evidence of this changing?
Well, Harding didn't really address this directly. Harding was more interested in it from a multicultural point of view, from the problem that scientists have also generally been Westerners. she asserts that there are different kinds of sciences. She says the same phenomenon exists. Gravity is gravity no matter where you live or what culture you're in. But different explanations for phenomenon exist in different cultures. And to assert one is more valid than another is to misunderstand the logic of some of it. And she spends a lot more time in her book sort of making the case that there are many sciences, many ways to look at natural phenomenon. While it may not be what we Westerners think of as science, it is still nonetheless an explanation about natural phenomenon, and it's often a workable explanation that makes it possible for people to coexist and enter into relationship with natural phenomenon. And she argues that that might make it more valid, or at least as valid, as what we think of as science.
So the bottom line is that contextuality issues cannot be done away with by willing them away. You can't become unbiased by self-identification.
You can't live outside of the fishbowl no matter how much you want to pretend that you are. Scientists are still part of culture. Scientists are still at the whims of culture. Science gets done on the basis of funding. Science gets done on the basis of who's interested and who has power when they're interested in a scientific question. I mean, there are lots of things that are not being addressed that science would be good to address. But it's not going to be addressed because the most powerful among this class of people are not interested in those particular questions. So even if you accept that this is a great way to know the world, a superior way to know the world, you still can't get out of the fishbowl. Whether you get into her debate about many sciences or only one science, because it is a class of people, it becomes sociological and culturally based, culturally contextualized. And it has all of the problems fraught with figuring out who goes into a class of people and who doesn't. It becomes a sociological phenomenon at that point. I mean, funding is a very good example. There are lots of questions that people would love to address, but who has the money? I mean, we would be on Mars right now if it weren't for money. The technology exists to get human beings from Earth to Mars. I mean, there's a few quirks that probably would have to be worked out or ironed out. But the fact of the matter is we have the fuel, and we have the methodology. We have people who would be willing to go, and we have people who have the know-how to get us there. And we're not going. I mean, I say we, human beings are not going. And the reason is that nobody has the political will or the social will to pay the money that you would have to pay to do that.
I read a book once that stated in all seriousness that John Kennedy's most memorable contribution, the aspect of his administration that people will be discussing 1,000 years from now, will be his decision to commence the Apollo project.
I agree.
That it's one thing to be able, technically, to go to the moon, and it's quite another to say, okay, here's $80 billion. Go away and do it.
Yes. And that was a political will. That was somebody who made a power decision and said, we are not going to take this $80 billion and spend it on X. Instead, we're going to spend it on Y. If you take a look at some of the ways that governments in the world are spending their money right now, you can see that they have a political will for a lot of other things. I mean, it isn't that the resources don't exist either. It is just that they're being spent elsewhere.
You're listening to First Person Plural on CFUV 101.9 FM Victoria.
Neil and Buzz, the President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over. That would be an honor. Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House. And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you do. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, I am sure they too join with us in recognizing what an immense feat this is. Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the sea of tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peace of all nations, and with interest and a curiosity and with a vision for the future. Honor for us to be able to participate here today.
And thank you very much, and I look forward, all of us look forward to seeing you on the Hornet on Thursday.
Look forward to that very much, sir.
Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. One last time. Hey, look up, identify our closest neighbor in the sky. Let loose with a lunar tune. Howl at the moon. Howl at the moon. Big finish. Howl at the moon. Oh, thank you very much.
You have been listening to First Person Plural on CFUV 101.9 FM in Victoria, British Columbia, simulcasted on 104.3 cable and cfuv.uvic.ca.
First Person Plural is produced weekly by Dr. Patty Thomas and Carl Wilkerson.
music for First Person Plural is composed, performed, and produced by Carl Wilkerson.
For more information about First Person Plural, or Patty Thomas and Carl Wilkerson, visit our website, culturalconstructioncompany.com.